For lab number 10, we're going to be identifying some unknown solutions. So first, before we get to the unknown solutions, we'll do some tests on known solutions, which are possible identities of our unknowns. And so I've actually got a set of 10 different known solutions here. What I've done first is what you can see is I've got a beaker of each substance that has some test tubes that already have some of those substances in them. And so I've prepped that for all of these. And I've got labeled so as we go through you can see what known substances we have. And we're going to run initially 4 tests, and we'll do these tests to see how these substances interact with different acids and bases. So the first one that we're going to do is with sulfuric acid. So I've got some sulfuric acid, and what I'm going to do is to each of our known substances, I'm going to add some sulfuric acid to the test tube and see if there's any changes. And if so, we need to write that down. So we should write down, is there no change observed, or is there some precipitation, or do you see bubbles? You know, whatever you see, you know, jot down to try to keep track, because we want to know what these known solutions do with each substance. That way, when we get to the unknowns, we can compare our results and figure out what the unknown solutions are. So our first one, KCl, it's a clear solution. Actually, all of these known solutions are just clear, colorless solutions. And then if I add the sulfuric acid, there we go, I added about 10 drops, and it still looks like a clear, colorless solution. And so there's a little air bubble in there right now from me shaking it, but it doesn't look like anything changed. So KCl with sulfuric acid, we see no change. Now next up, we're looking at MgCl2, so magnesium chloride. Again, it's a clear, colorless solution to start with. And I'm going to add about 10 drops of sulfuric acid. Okay, again, I don't see a change, so it still looks like a clear, colorless solution for the MgCl2. And then next up, we have CaCl2. We'll add our sulfuric acid. It's again starting as a clear, colorless solution. Okay, and still clear, colorless, so far no excitement. Okay, next up we've got BaCl2, so barium chloride. Again, like I said, another clear, colorless solution. We'll add our sulfuric acid. Okay, now finally we see a change. So this now creates this kind of white solution. And really, usually when you see that, when you see color throughout the solution, just like before what we've seen, is there's likely some solid that formed. So I'll let this sit, but right now you can note that it creates this white solution. We'll let it sit, and once I get through all the solutions, we can come back and look at that barium chloride. Okay, next up we've got K2CO3, so potassium carbonate, another clear, colorless solution. We'll add our sulfuric acid. And if you're watching closely, what you should have seen is there were bubbles forming, and they're still forming. It's kind of slow, but those are actual bubbles being formed by that mixture of the K2CO3 and the sulfuric acid. And so that one had bubbles form. Okay, next we've got K3PO4. Again, another clear, colorless solution. We'll add our sulfuric acid. let's see, doesn't look like anything changed. So that one's no change. We got potassium phosphate and sulfuric acid. Okay, next up we've got MgSO4, so magnesium sulfate. And that, again, a clear colorless solution. And let's add the sulfuric acid. Okay. Doesn't look like anything changed, so we still have a clear colorless solution for the magnesium sulfate. Okay, next up, we have MnSO4, which is manganese 2 sulfate. So be careful. That last one was magnesium sulfate. This is manganese 2 sulfate. So it's a transition metal that can have more than one charge, so we say that in its name. Okay, and we have a clear colorless solution. I'll add the sulfuric acid. Okay. And it looks like, again, no change. Okay. Next up, we have zinc sulfate. Again, like all the others, clear colorless solution to start with. And then add the sulfuric acid. Okay, no change. Clear colorless solution still. Okay, next up, we've got ammonium sulfate. And we're starting with a clear colorless solution. Okay, and we still have a clear colorless solution. And let's go back, because we had the barium chloride, right? This was our barium chloride. And remember, it was that white solution. If we go back and look at it, see, we've given it time to settle. So there's definitely some solid down there at the bottom, some white solid. And so that definitely formed a precipitate. Whereas, remember, the potassium carbonate, you can still see some bubbles in there. And it's still slowly forming some bubbles. Okay, next we're going to test all of these solutions with a strong base, specifically with sodium hydroxide. And so first up, we've got the potassium chloride. So just like before, I'll add about 10 drops to this. And it looks like no change, still clear colorless solution. And then next up, we've got magnesium chloride. And so 10 drops of sodium hydroxide. See, it looks like we've got a little bit of a change here. And so it's a little bit cloudy. And maybe I can get it to focus a bit better. It actually is a little bit of solid floating in there. It's not a lot, but that's what that cloudiness is, and it kind of looks like it's trapped up in there, that it's not even going to sink. But we'll let it sit. We'll come back to it when we're done with all the tests. But we definitely have a change. We have some cloudiness. Okay, now the calcium chloride solution. Okay, this one also turns into this kind of white solution. Okay, and again, we'll wait because it's likely that that's solid in there and that it'll float or it'll sink to the bottom. Okay, next up, barium chloride. Okay, now this one we've also got some white in there. This, it's a little easier to tell. There's definitely some particles floating around in there. So it's almost a little bit between the magnesium and the calcium chlorides. It's a little more solid than what the magnesium produced, it looks like, but less than what the calcium did. But again, we definitely have a reaction there. Okay, next up, potassium carbonate. Okay. Doesn't look like anything happened. It's just a clear solution. Okay, next up, potassium phosphate. Okay, also just a clear colorless solution, so no change. Okay, next up, magnesium sulfate. Okay, now we got a white solution here too. So probably some solid. We'll let it sit a minute and see what it looks like after. Okay, next up, let's do the manganese 2 sulfate. Okay, now it's a little bit more interesting. Looks like we've got this kind of yellowish solution, but again, you can't see through it, so it's likely that this is some solid that's formed in there. So we'll give it a minute or two to sit there and settle. Let's move on to the zinc sulfate. Okay, so this one looks like you also have some stuff forming. It's kind of got that cloudiness. You've actually got some particles you can see floating in there. So we'll give that one a chance to settle as well. And lastly, the ammonium sulfate. And another just clear, colorless solution. Okay, so we did have several that changed. Let's go back and look at these. We've given them a little bit of time to sit. We've got the magnesium chloride, and so that you can see the top now of that solution is starting to get clear, and that's because that white solid is starting to sink. And so yes, we definitely have some precipitate in there. Next up, we've got the calcium chloride. Now this one, you can't see it clearing up at the top, but you can see some solid that has started to settle here. So you definitely have some precipitate there. And then the barium chloride. This one is also started to settle, and so the solution's a lot more clear. You definitely have some precipitate, some white precipitate down at the bottom. And then let's see the other changes we had. We had the magnesium sulfate, and so that you've still got kind of this cloudy solution. It hasn't settled much, but we haven't given it as much time as the others. Okay, it looks like it's really slow to settle, but we've got that cloudiness in there, so something got formed. Okay, and then the manganese 2 sulfate. Looks like it's started to separate a little bit, but you've even got some dark brown solid that's floating around in there, along with still that yellowish solution that you can't see through. Okay, and then the zinc sulfate, that one has started to settle, so you've got kind of that clear solution at the top and a lot of white solid down at the bottom. Okay, next we're going to test all of our solutions with sodium hydrogen carbonate or sodium bicarbonate. So I'll add about 10 drops of this to each solution, just like before. So we have the potassium chloride, okay, so no change, still a clear colorless solution. Next up we have magnesium chloride. Okay, so again, no change for that one. Then we've got our calcium chloride. Okay, so the calcium chloride, we got, again, kind of this white solution. So probably some solid in there. We'll let it sit as we do these others. Then we've got barium chloride. Okay, and similar to that calcium chloride, we again got kind of this white solution. Okay, now we have our potassium carbonate. Looks like no change. And then our potassium phosphate. And also looks like no change. We've got magnesium sulfate. No change. And then manganese 2 sulfate. Okay, so it looks like this one changed. We've got another white solution, so we've got some solid floating around in there. Then we've got zinc sulfate. And this one also this white solution. So we'll let that one settle as well. Then we've got ammonium sulfate. And that one looks like no change. So again, let's go back and look at these. So we've got the calcium chloride form this kind of white solution. It hasn't settled yet, but if you look around the top up there, you can kind of see that it's grainy. You've definitely got some solid, some white precipitate in there. And then the barium chloride. That one you can kind of see the top. You see that little clear layer at the top? It is starting to settle. And so you do have some white solid that's slowly settling in that solution. So we've got, again, a white precipitate for the barium chloride. And then, let's see, next change we had was manganese 2 sulfate. And so that one almost looks the same as the last one, like the very top layer starting to clear, but it's only slowly settling. And so you can see that clear layer at the top, and so it's just starting to settle. So you have some white solid in there, white precipitate, and that manganese 2 sulfate. Let's see, then we have our zinc sulfate. Now this one's kind of interesting. This one looks quite a bit different. You've got some odd bubbles that have formed in there. And it's actually, right now, it's bubbling. And so not only did we form some white solid, but we also have bubbles being formed at the same time. And so those are being slowly formed, and then every once in a while you see one pop. Yeah, you can see the bubbles coming up from the solution. Next, we're going to use what's called a universal indicator. So this is actually a mixture of several indicators, and so it doesn't just have one color change, it has several different color changes throughout the pH range. So we're going to use this to test all of our substances and see what color we get from each. So first we have the KCl, and I'm not even going to add 10 drops. An indicator, usually you only need, a drop or two, or actually for this small of an amount, a drop should be sufficient. I'll add maybe 3 drops. Okay, so from that, for our KCl, we got kind of this dark orange color. So it's actually the color of this indicator. It's kind of that dark orange color. So you could write down dark orange. That's kind of our no change. But since it's a color, you can write it down. And then we've got the magnesium chloride. It looks like we get that same color for that magnesium chloride, another dark orange. Then next up, calcium chloride. This one actually looks a little bit lighter than the other two, and so we had that dark orange and we have this light, almost yellowish. It's more of a yellow orange than your potassium chloride and your magnesium chloride, which were darker oranges. So this one's more of a yellow, I would say. Yeah, even after giving it a minute, it looks kind of yellow. Okay, next up we have barium chloride. Okay, this one's also starting out light compared to the others. But now if we go back and compare, we've got the magnesium chloride, and it's this dark color compared to this lighter of the barium chloride, right? And so it's lighter than the magnesium chloride, but then the calcium chloride and the barium, you've got the calcium's lighter than the barium. And so you've got your calcium's chloride's kind of that yellowish color, and then your magnesium and potassium were both kind of this dark orange, and then your barium chloride's more of kind of a light orange, but definitely orange, not yellow. Okay, then we have potassium carbonate. Okay, so this one's definitely quite a bit different than the others. So this one, as I kind of shake it, you can see when it goes up on the sides of the tube, it's kind of this purplish color. It almost looks black here, but if I shake it and get kind of less of the solution or turn it on its side, you can kind of see that that's really a purple color that's in there, other than the drops that are stuck on the tube. Okay, so that's the potassium carbonate. We get kind of a purple color. And then we have potassium phosphate. And this is looking similar. Looks looks again like a purple color. Okay. Next up, magnesium sulfate. And this one's another kind of dark orange color. So this one looks dark like the magnesium chloride did and the potassium chloride. So it's a real dark orange, almost reddish. Okay, next up, manganese 2 sulfate. And this one looks the same as well. This one looks kind of this reddish orange color. So that dark orange. Okay, next up, zinc sulfate. Okay, that one looks similar to several of those others, that really dark orange color. And let's see, next up we've got our ammonium sulfate. So ammonium sulfate. And that looks like most of the others did. So we've got kind of that dark orange. So most of them turned out this kind of dark orange color. The ones that were a little bit different were the calcium chloride was that yellow color. The barium chloride was that light orange color. And then your potassium, let's see if we can see it here. The potassium carbonate and the potassium phosphate, both of those were kind of that purplish solution. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to test some unknown solutions. So we had 10 known solutions that we ran 4 tests each on, and we have the results of those. And then 3 of those solutions we have here, but we don't know which is which. So I just have them labeled as 1, 2, and 3. And so we're going to run the same tests on these and compare them to the test results of our known solutions. So first we will run the sulfuric acid test. So we'll take unknown number 1 and add about 10 drops of sulfuric acid. And as I was adding those, you should have seen bubbles forming. So that one, it had bubbles forming. Now that looks like that's done, but you definitely had something happening. Now, unknown number 2, we'll add the sulfuric acid. And it looks like that has no change. And we'll do unknown number 3 with the sulfuric acid. And that one also looks like no change. Okay, so that's our sulfuric acid results. We had bubbles, and then we have no change for the other 2. Okay, next test, we'll run the sodium hydroxide. So we'll see what each does with sodium hydroxide. So unknown number 1 with sodium hydroxide. And it looks like nothing changed with that one. We have unknown number 2 with sodium hydroxide. And that one definitely has some white precipitate that formed. And then last, we've got unknown number 3. And that one also got kind of cloudy, but this one's actually a little bit yellowish. But we definitely have some precipitate forming, but it's definitely a different color. Okay, so that's our test results with sodium hydroxide. Then next, we will do the test with sodium hydrogen carbonate or sodium bicarbonate. And unknown 1 with sodium bicarbonate. That one looks like no change. Unknown number 2 with sodium bicarbonate. Okay, and that one again formed some sort of white precipitate in there. And then number 3. Another white precipitate. So that's all with the sodium bicarbonate or sodium hydrogen carbonate. You have no change with the number 1 and white precipitates with numbers 2 and 3. Okay, last test is with our universal indicator. And so we'll take our universal indicator, add that to number 1. And you could see that actually formed that purplish solution. And then number 2. That one looks like a really light color. Yeah, it actually looks like it's lightening as it sits there. So that one looks like it's actually the yellow color. And then number 3. Oh, that one we've got kind of that dark orange color. So we got a purple, a yellow, and then a dark orange for our unknowns in the universal indicator.